Every year, more than 500,000 people go missing in the US alone. In a lot of these cases, there are at least some clues about where the person might have gone, which gives the authorities something to work with. Most disappearances are like that. Stuff like this usually goes down in quiet places where nobody's around to see it, or where there aren't any security cameras to help the police figure things out. Without that evidence, it's tough for investigators to piece together what happened and find the missing person. But even though it's not common, people can go missing in busy places too. Just look at what happened to 19-year-old Jason Jolkowski from Benson, Omaha on June 13, 2001. That morning, around 10:15 a.m., Jason got a call. Jason got a call from his boss asking him to come into Fazoli's early, even though it wasn't his shift. He couldn't say no to the extra money, so he agreed, but mentioned that his car was in the shop, so he'd have to walk the 4 miles from his house. Since the restaurant was super busy, his boss offered to send a co-worker to pick him up, but Jason figured it would be quicker if he just got picked up directly. Instead of meeting at his house, they decided Jason would meet his county worker at the parking lot of Benson High Magnet School, which he graduated from just 2 years ago. The school was only about half a mile from Jason's place, and it usually took him around 10 minutes to walk there, so it made it a lot easier for him that day. After hanging up with his boss, Jason quickly jumped in the shower, got dressed, and headed out the door. He left the house and saw that the trash had already been picked up that morning, so he decided to take the empty cans back to the garage. This would save his 13-year-old brother Michael some work, since it was usually his job. Around 10:45 a.m., Jason's neighbor Chester Link saw him putting the trash cans away and then heading towards Benson High. Little did Link know, he would be the last person to see Jason Jolkowski alive. At 11:15 that day, Jason's co-worker. She was getting really anxious because he still hadn't shown up, so she decided to drive to a nearby gas station to use the payphone and call their boss. She filled him in on what was happening, and he told her to hang tight just in case Jason showed up. But he never did, so she headed back to work around 11:30. Around that time, Jason's boss called his home phone to check in, but it was Jason's brother who answered. He told the boss that the last time he saw Jason, he was heading out. It was at this point that they found out Jason was missing. His parents got called at work and were informed about his disappearance. The police were notified shortly after, but since Jason was a teenager and kids sometimes run away, they didn't start their official investigation for over a week. Meanwhile, his neighborhood was on high alert when they heard the news, making it unlikely for anyone to get away with anything. They came back and hid evidence or did something to mess with the case, but they'd have been caught when the police started investigating. Still, the cops didn't find anything new in the weeks that followed Jason's sudden disappearance. There were ground searches, helicopters, and infrared tech used to try to find him. Hundreds of people were questioned, and police checked out every house nearby. They also looked into every part of his personal life. Life was questioning his friends and going through his computer, but not a single clue ever turned up to explain what had happened to him. In every practical sense, it looked like Jason had just disappeared into thin air during his short 7-block walk to Benson High. A 30-year veteran of the Omaha PD told Jason's mum, Kelly, that in his entire career, this was the most puzzling case he had ever come across. It's really uncommon to not find even one lead after someone goes missing. Disappearing in a busy neighborhood where everyone knew him is just baffling. Not a single person was ever suspected, and the cops didn't have anyone they were looking into. Jason's family and friends were left with so many questions about what happened to him, but the biggest one was how he could just vanish during a quick 10-minute walk he'd done hundreds of times, right in the middle of the day, without leaving any trace behind. To answer this question, the first thing the police did was check the security cameras at Benson High School, since that was where Jason was supposed to go that day. It made sense to see if he ever made it there, but he didn't show up on any of the cameras around, including the nearby middle school cameras, which he would have had to walk past to get to Benson High. And he also wasn't on Bedford Avenue, which was the main road he would have needed to take to reach the school. The area was just too busy for nobody to have seen him, which made the authorities think he must have vanished close to his house. The first theory was that someone grabbed him in a car right after he left, but who could pull that off in such a short amount of time without making a fuss? Plus, what would be the reason for someone to randomly go after Jason? His mum said he was pretty private and only had a few friends. There's really no one on the planet who had an issue with him, standing at 6 feet 1 inch and weighing about 180 pounds. Plus, it's pretty unlikely someone would have picked him as a target for a crime, since he'd be hard to take down with his size. Even if someone did try to grab him, it doesn't explain how they could have done it without being seen. Jason's mum told the investigators that he was really shy because of a learning disability that messed with his language skills, so he would never have. Getting into a stranger's car willingly means someone would have had to force him in, but that's really unlikely considering he was in a neighborhood in broad daylight. There were homes all around and people out on their morning walks. If there had been a struggle, someone would have seen or heard something. All this suggests it was someone he knew, but that theory is hard to accept given his learning disability. Jason, he was pretty shy and socially awkward, at least according to his parents. Because of that, he would only hop in a car with a close friend, not just anyone he knew. Plus, since his trip was only 10 minutes long, all his close friends and anyone he felt comfortable enough to ride with had solid alibis. If he did get picked up, it probably happened early on in his trip, because once he was near the school, there wouldn't be any reason to take a ride, according to the police. So here's the deal, if that's true, it's pretty hard to believe that someone Jason knew who wanted to hurt him just happened to be driving by at the exact moment he was leaving. Unless it was planned out and they knew exactly where he would be. The tricky part is, Jason wasn't even supposed to go into work that morning. So even if someone knew his plans and wanted to hurt him, there's no way they could have known he'd be making a last-minute trip. At that time, the only people who knew about it were Jason's boss at Fazoli's and the co-worker who was supposed to pick him up. The cops cleared both of them, saying they had nothing to do with it. Some people think Jason might have taken a detour with someone he knew, which is why no evidence turned up on his usual route. But his friends said Jason was super responsible and always on time. He would never be late for work, especially since he had someone waiting for him. They think that if he did get a ride, it was just to the school and nowhere else, which makes the theory that he disappeared somewhere along his usual route that day seem more likely. Others wonder if there was even a car involved at all and suggest that Jason might have been lured into a neighbor's house by someone pretending to need help. After all, Jason was known for being kind and caring about other people's struggles. Some people believe there was a predator in the area. He might have taken advantage of his kindness to hurt him, but while that theory could work, it's not very likely. Jason only had 15 minutes to get to school, and even though he was nice, he was super punctual. He probably wouldn't have stopped to help a neighbor if he was in a rush and someone was waiting for him, like his co-worker was. Plus, it's pretty rare for a predator to act so openly in broad daylight in their own community. That's just a really risky move. It's not likely at all. It's surprising that even someone with a criminal record would take such a risk, and Omaha police didn't notice anyone in the area who seemed like they could commit the crime. One last idea put forward was that he might not have been kidnapped at all and could have just vanished on his own. A Reddit user named DJG123, who worked with Jason at a radio station connected to his broadcasting program at Iowa Western Community College, made a post dismissing that idea. But when they were asked if it was common for someone to just disappear like that, this part of Benson in the morning, and if she believes Jason just disappeared on his own, DJG123 said that it's really unusual for him to just vanish. A lot of people think he might have known his kidnappers. Jason wasn't stupid, he wouldn't just hop into a car with a stranger. But they never found any signs of a struggle nearby, and no one heard anything out of the ordinary. So it either has to be a quick, surprise abduction where he couldn't resist, or he went willingly. He knew someone, but he was super responsible and wouldn't just ditch work. He probably just went for a ride to the school since he had a ride waiting for him there. By the way, he was terrible at giving directions, so he was meeting his county worker at Benson High School because that was simpler. No part of me thinks he just vanished on purpose, no way. DJG123 mentioned that Jason was about to start a new job at a company called Site Corp the week after he went missing. He was thrilled about being a representative and really into his radio career, which looked bright. There was no reason for Jason to just walk away, so a lot of folks in the community, especially those who knew him, started to worry that something bad had happened to him. So, what really went down with Jason Jorkovsky on that fateful day? The absence of evidence or witnesses leaves us only to speculate, but in cases like this, it's hard to even guess what might have happened. Some folks think Jason might have been mixed up in something that the investigators didn't know about, which is why there were no leads. Others believe whatever happened to him was so strange that no one could wrap their head around it. No matter what, Jason Jorkovsky's disappearance showed everyone that sometimes your own neighborhood can be risky. On November 15, 2015, 82-year-old Thomas Messick Sr. was on his yearly deer hunting trip just south of Brant Lake in Horicon, New York. Even though he was doing something he knew well, this day turned out to be different. It would be the day he disappeared without a trace and was never seen again. Early that Sunday, Thomas was with a group of 7, made up of friends and family. They were hunting near a small pond called Lily Pond and using a popular hunting method called a deer drive, where a bunch of hunters pushed deer toward their buddies. The group split into two teams, the drivers who would chase the prey, and the watchers who waited in ambush. Thomas Messick and 3 older members were the watchers, lined up less than 100 yards apart. That day, the younger drivers noticed an unsettling silence in the forest, almost like there wasn't any wildlife at all, as they crept closer to where Thomas was supposed to be. He had been waiting at his spot when they got there, but to their surprise, he was nowhere to be found. Confused, they searched the area but couldn't find any trace of Thomas. To really get why his sudden disappearance shocked his crew so much, it's important to know a bit about Thomas Messick. First off, he served in the US Army as a paratrooper with the renowned 82nd Airborne Division. He was also an expert hunter and woodsman, skills he'd been perfecting for decades. Plus, he taught hunting. After years of survival training, his level of expertise is what makes his disappearance so strange. It's one thing for someone with no experience to go missing in the wild, but when a survival expert with decades of experience disappears close to his group, it raises some serious red flags. Soon after he went missing, the group contacted the forest rangers and searched from about 4:30 p.m. until it got dark around 7, at which point half the group. They hung around, firing their guns and honking car horns to try to lure Thomas over, while everyone else took off and told his family he was missing the next day. An extensive search kicked off with 13 trained rescue workers from the Park Service called in to help find him. This was just the start of a massive effort that stretched out for months, involving over 300 professionals and volunteers, and some days there were dogs, divers, and helicopters involved too. Several agencies were involved in looking for him, including the FBI's Critical Incident Response Team and other specialized groups. Despite their efforts, they never found anything that could explain what happened to Thomas, not even his rifle or the walkie-talkie he used to talk to the other hunters in the woods. They covered over 4 square miles on the ground and even searched a bigger area from the air with helicopters. Thomas Messick's disappearance is just really confusing. Given how thorough the search for him was, it's pretty weird that no evidence turned up at all. His skills in surviving in the woods and hunting make this even more mysterious because it's hard to believe someone with that kind of experience would get lost or confused. The official search for Thomas Messick wrapped up on November 26, 2015, but they kept doing periodic searches in the years after using cadaver dogs, and they never detected anything. To this day, no evidence has been found from the area, like Thomas just disappeared into thin air. But what really happened to Thomas Messick? A lot of people think his walkie-talkie is a key clue. He was on the same radio channel as the rest of his group, was close enough to reach them, and knew how to use it. So, if he was in trouble, why didn't he call for help? Did he have a medical issue, hurt himself, get lost, or just want to be alone? He left his post for a bit and could have easily told his group what was going on. The fact that they never heard from him makes it seem like whatever happened to Thomas surprised him. It was weird that the FBI showed up. They usually don't deal with missing person cases unless it involves a kid. A few days into the search, they told Thomas's wife, Beverly Messick, that something was off about the case, but they couldn't say what. Those at the investigation noticed that the FBI was being super secretive and didn't seem to be sticking to their usual protocols. This led to rumors that the FBI might have had a hidden agenda they weren't sharing, and that Thomas Messick's case was part of something bigger they were looking into. There are a lot of strange disappearances happening in national parks, and some people think the FBI might be particularly interested in these cases. 9 days after Thomas Messick's, a 68-year-old city councilman named Fred Drum went missing under similar strange circumstances just 40 miles away in Schillerville, New York. He lived on a farm with his wife and loved the outdoors, just like Thomas. Early in the morning on November 24, 2015, Fred's wife went to a banquet and came back later in the afternoon to find Fred was gone. His car was still at the house, which meant he couldn't have gone far, but there was still no sign of him. There was no sign anything was stolen and no signs of a break-in either. He didn't take anything with him, which makes it seem like he either left the house in a rush or something pulled him out, and he didn't have time to grab anything. After he went missing, a massive search kicked off with dogs, helicopters, and even some rescue teams that had worked on finding Thomas Messick. But in the end, no evidence was ever found. The outcome was the same as with Thomas, and we might never really know what happened. Sure, a lot of people noticed the strange similarities between the two cases. Both guys were older and had plenty of experience in the outdoors, yet they both vanished under mysterious circumstances from places where they were supposed to stay. Some folks pointed out that Fred had access to his house and cell phone, which he could have used if he was in trouble, but he never did. This was similar to Thomas Music not using his walkie-talkie even though he had it on hand. Investigators thought this suggested that both cases were connected in some way. There was an element of surprise, and on top of that, the two guys went missing just a little over a week apart, pretty close to each other. A lot of people think these two cases must be connected in some way, and that the person the FBI was looking for in the Thomas Messick investigation might also be behind Fred Drum's disappearance. While the FBI could have been looking into something more sinister, like foul play, there are just too many gaps in that theory. There weren't any signs of a struggle in the area where it happened. Thomas just disappeared, and since he was a top-notch marksman who was armed at the time, it seems pretty unlikely he would have just gone down without a fight. There weren't any boot prints or signs of anyone else being around his post. Some people mentioned that Thomas couldn't see out of one eye and had limited use of one hand, but those problems didn't bother him in his daily life. He adapted to those challenges and always tried to stay more aware of what was going on around him because of it. It's really unlikely that anyone could have sneaked up on him. Plus, someone in his group would have definitely heard if there had been a fight since they were close enough to shout to each other, and that part of the woods is super quiet. Even if someone had managed to get to Thomas, there's no way they could have gotten rid of him in the short time between when the hunt started and when his crew noticed he was missing, which was less than 2 hours. There weren't any tire tracks or anything out of the ordinary. There were vehicles around, and there was only one road to get to where they were. So, any other hunters would have definitely heard a car coming in or leaving, but nobody reported that. The fact that nothing was ever found of his makes it seem like he was taken out of there. But how could someone have gotten rid of all the evidence, including Thomas's remains, the big rifle he had, and his stuff, in such a short time without a vehicle, especially when they were just a few yards away? Other members of his hunting party didn't notice anything unusual, but there was an interesting twist in the case. During an interview, Thomas's longtime friend and hunting buddy, Sid Sharp, talked about a really strange metallic noise he heard in the woods about 150 yards away from Thomas on the day he went missing. Despite having 5 decades of hunting under his belt, Sid told the investigators that it was a sound he'd never heard before, saying, "It's hard to explain, but it was definitely different. It was something I've never heard before in the woods, and I just can't put my finger on what it was." A lot of people, including Sid, think these two things must be related. It's just too much of a coincidence that a seasoned hunter heard something totally unfamiliar in the forest on the same day his friend went missing under such weird circumstances. Strange stuff like lights in the sky or odd sounds often come up in cases of people disappearing in national parks. Some people think these might help explain what's going on in these cases, but what they really are is still a mystery. Thomas Messick's disappearance still baffles investigators because there's just no logical answer. Every theory just raises more questions. If he was supposed to stay at his post that day, why did he leave? If he did leave, where could he have gone, and why didn't he tell his group with his monkey? How far could he really have gotten by himself? Given his age, if he had died suddenly or gotten caught in a storm, how come no one ever found his body? And if someone did do something to him, what would the reason be? How could they get rid of him without anyone noticing, especially without a car? We may never know the full story, but someone out there has to know something. On May 8, 1965, a 26-year-old ionospheric physicist named Carl Robert Dish disappeared near Bird Station in Antarctica, where he was working on radio systems. For the National Bureau of Standards and Technology, it might not seem that surprising for someone to go missing in such a harsh place like Antarctica, but his disappearance was really strange. So, that morning at 9:15, he was supposed to be heading back from the radio noise building, where he worked, to the propagation laboratory, the main station in the complex. It was just a quick trip, barely over a mile. He'd done this dozens of times before. The two buildings were linked by a rope line, which helped researchers get from one to the other when the weather made it hard to see. He knew this route well since he had to take it several times a week, and it usually took him no more than 20 minutes. But on this day, when the clock struck 10 and he still hadn't shown up, his co-workers got worried and decided to put together a search team to go find him. While searching for him along his planned route, they didn't find any sign of Dish. But around 11:30, they stumbled upon some footprints near the radio noise building. This is where his crew ran into their first mystery. Instead of heading south along the hand line as they expected, the footprints veered west toward the landing strip where supplies were flown in. It was like something made Dish change his mind at the last minute and head in a different direction. His teammates followed those footprints for 4 miles, and then they The crew had to head back to camp and refuel, and besides going the wrong way, there was something curious about the footsteps. At first, his teammates thought he got lost, which is the obvious thing to assume in that situation. But looking at the spacing between his footprints, it was clear he was walking steadily and his steps were consistent, like he knew exactly where he was headed. These weren't the tracks of someone who was confused, they were definitely intentional. Dish's co-workers figured out that he wouldn't just wander 4 miles in a straight line at a steady pace if he was really lost. So, they guessed he was headed towards something. The problem is, it's unclear what that was since nothing was coming in that day at the landing strip, and there were no strange footprints or tire tracks. It's not like dish-to-ditch protocol like that, so whatever caught his eye must have really grabbed his attention. After refueling, the team set off again toward the landing strip, looking for another 3 hours but didn't find any sign of Dish. By then, the snow was starting to cover his tracks. At 7 p.m., another team headed out to thoroughly search the supply line, the emergency James Way, and the fuel dump area, but had no luck. An hour later, everyone available formed a human chain to search from the main base all the way down to the landing strip where Dish was last seen. The steps were gone, and the floodlights around the station were turned on. Flares were shot off every 30 minutes to draw him to the area, but this went on until the visibility got too low for the flares to work. The next day, on May 9th, another search party was put together to cover a stretch 1 mile wide and 9 miles long, from the base to the landing strip and beyond. They found some old, untouched tracks that had been seen before, but they lost them too. The trail just stopped suddenly about 4 miles southwest of the radio noise, around 7:40 a.m. on May 10th, quite a while after Dish went missing. An 8-man search team set out from the station to find him as a last-ditch effort. They had 2 vehicles, an emergency hut, and enough fuel and supplies to last a week. The search kicked off from the main complex, heading south while also making sweeps east and west to cover as much ground as possible. They went 12 miles, using flags to mark their paths so they wouldn't go over the same area twice, but they still didn't find any more tracks or any sign of Dish. On May 12th, the team searched the northeast and southeast areas of Bird Station just in case they missed something. They had more searches lined up for the next 2 days, but the weather made it impossible. By the 14th, they had searched a huge area of 35 square miles around there, but Carl Robert Dish was never seen again and was presumed dead. In the weeks that followed, it's not uncommon for people to go missing in places with crazy weather, but there are a lot of things about this case that just don't add up. The main idea is that poor visibility and wild weather messed with his sense of direction and led him off his usual route. But this theory doesn't really hold up for a bunch of reasons. He had walked that path between the 2 buildings loads of times and knew the place really well. What could have happened? It all went wrong this time. He got so confused that he ended up going the wrong way, even though it was just a quick routine trip. I mean, with the visibility being so low, you'd think he couldn't miss the handline since it was right at the bottom of the ladder leading into the radio noise building. You'd spot it as soon as you hit the ground. But if he somehow did overlook the handline, it still doesn't make sense why he kept walking in a straight line at a steady pace for miles like he was lost. You could easily tell by his footprints that they were pretty irregular. The way he walked showed he was definitely heading somewhere with a purpose. Plus, the footprints were still visible an hour and a half after his co-workers noticed he was missing. If they could see his prints that long after he left, what could have possibly stopped him from just backtracking to the building with the radio noise, especially if he was confused? Just like his crew did to a lot of people, it's pretty clear he wasn't wandering around for no reason, he had a goal. But this raises a question: if Dish was actually heading somewhere, like his footsteps hinted, what was he after? The weird stuff around this case and the missing solid evidence has made a lot of folks wonder if Carl Robert Dish was taken. While some might think this theory is pretty out there, many believe it could be true, especially because his footsteps suddenly stopped about 4 miles out. The radio's buzzing, and even though some doubters say his footprints got buried under new snow, that doesn't really add up. How can you explain that the first 4 miles of his trail were totally clear even an hour and a half after he vanished, but then it just stops, like it snowed only after that point? It makes people think the only way his prints could have just ended like that is if he was picked up somehow. Some people who really believe in this theory say it lines up nicely with the story. They think that after he called his co-workers to say he was heading back to the main site, he spotted a craft on the landing strip and chose to check it out. That's why he suddenly changed direction at the last minute. Once he got close to it, he vanished, which could explain why his footprints went in a straight line at a steady pace and then just stopped. This theory might also shed light on what the crew went through. Looking for the dish, it's been said by a bunch of sources that while they were searching for it and in the months after, there were some really weird things happening around Bird Station. People reported strange lights in the sky with no clue where they were coming from, and odd noises coming from far away. Since Antarctica is pretty much deserted, and Bird Station is the only research center for hundreds of miles, it makes you think about what could have been causing all these strange sights and sounds. What's really interesting about the days after Dish went missing, besides all the weird stuff happening at Bird Station, is that his dog, a husky named Gus, also disappeared. The crew thought Gus might have picked up Dish's scent and went out searching for him, but sadly, he might have met the same fate. Even though the whole abduction theory could explain the strange things going on in this case, a lot of people just can't buy into such a wild idea and suggest more realistic explanations, even if none of them really add up. It really makes you think when you dig into the details. One theory is that Dish might have had a mental breakdown because there are whispers he got cheated in a card game right before he left the building. He was already struggling with being isolated, and a lot of folks think that could have been what pushed him over the edge, leading him to just walk out into the wilderness without